What's up, BookTube? I got an interesting topic that I wanted to bring up today because it came up in my head on a Sunday afternoon as I was reading a book that I'm really getting into. It's a book that I picked up from Book of the Month, and it got me thinking about intended audience and how that can persuade or dissuade people from reading certain books. So I'm going to talk about that next. Okay, booktubers, so the book that I'm reading right now is Black Buck by Matteo Ascaripour. And let me read just a little bit about it, just to give you an idea of what this book is about, because I think it's going to help you understand maybe why I'm having this topic here about intended audiences and how that can persuade or dissuade somebody from wanting to read a book. Okay. For fans of Sorry to Bother You and The Wolf of Wall Street, a blazing satirical debut novel about a young man given a shot at stardom as the lone black salesman at a mysterious, cult-like, and wildly successful startup where nothing is as it seems. And the book certainly is written probably more so to appeal to a black audience, maybe even a black male audience. And I started to pick up on that pretty early as I was reading the book. And it got me thinking about whether I would recommend or maybe not be quite so eager to recommend this particular book to different audiences. And the more I thought about that, I started to weigh the pros and cons. And so let's start with the cons. So a con, for example, is that there is some language in black culture that might be uncomfortable for a non-black audience to read. There are some situations that might be uncomfortable for a non-black audience to read about. And there may be some challenges understanding why those situations and that language could be discomforting for people of certain races and ethnicities, but strangely comforting to people of another race or ethnicity. And so when I started thinking about that, the cons of it, then I started to weigh, well, what are the pros? And the pros are that, you get a look inside of how certain situations present themselves to people of color, particularly in the workforce, and the way that you can be tabbed as the prodigy. And in some ways that could be based on your skin color, and you can be tabbed for strange opportunities that have nothing to do necessarily with your ability, your talent, or your potential, but just because of maybe what you represent to the person that maybe wants to bring you in, and what you could represent to the organization or company that wants to bring you in. And so some of those things that happen. And it really reminded me right off the bat as I read the description of the book, it reminded me of a famous book. Okay, so that famous book that it reminded me of is The Spook Who Sat by the Door by Sam Greenlee. And I read this book many years ago, and I've watched the movie since. I discovered the movie right here on YouTube, in the YouTube streets. And I was really glad, as always, that I read the book first. But let me read this. Now, remember what I read to you about Black Buck, and I want you to think about that as I read to you what this is about. An explosive, award-winning novel in the black literary tradition, The Spook Who Sat by the Door is both a satire of the civil rights problems in the United States in the late 1960s and a serious attempt to focus on the same issue of black militancy. Dan Freeman, the spook who sat by the door, is enlisted in the CIA's elitist espionage program. Upon mastering agency tactics, however, he drops out to train young Chicago blacks as freedom fighters. As a story of one black man's reaction to ruling class hypocrisy, the book is autobiographical and personal. As a tale of man's reaction to oppression, it is universal, a publication in the African American Life series. And so you start to think about that, and I immediately thought about this book as I started reading Black Buck. Because Black Buck, what it does is it gives you an idea of how you can be put into a certain situation with different motives that aren't necessarily as ideal as perhaps they should be. But then what do you do with that opportunity when you do get it? And so when you think of the satire that took place in The Spook Who Sat by the Door, and then you think of the satire that takes place in this, granted, I'm still not finished with this yet, but I'm probably about a quarter of the way through it. And so it really just got me to think about that and who is the intended audience. And sometimes just because you're not the intended audience doesn't mean that you should shy away from reading a book to understand about a struggle from a different perspective that could, in a way, enlighten you to help you better understand a situation because you're looking at it through the eyes of someone else as opposed to through your own eyes, through narratives that you're maybe more comfortable with. And so that's one of the reasons why I was really excited to read Black Buck, and I'm looking forward to finishing it, and I'm looking forward to frankly telling you guys a little bit more about it on this channel once I'm done with it, which will probably be in a few days from when I shot this video, and I'll probably look forward to wrapping it up with you when I do my January 2021 wrap-up video. But in the meantime, be open-minded to books that might not necessarily be targeting you as the audience. This is something I talked about when I read the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. I probably was not the intended audience for that particular book, but I'm glad I read it because it allowed me to look at systemic racism from a different perspective, looking at how it was presented to an audience that was not intended to be me. And so for that reason, I found that book to be quite enlightening and I enjoyed it. And I think Black Buck is going to be the same for me.